Everyone, we're a bit late, but I think everybody's here now. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Babergh Planning Committee. I will now ask the Government's Officer to read out the domestic arrangements and the fire regulations. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations whilst others are speaking. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off and that your laptop is also switched to silent. We will be using the e-voting for this meeting on the Modern Gov app, so please could members make sure they are logged in and ready to use the app. If you hear the fire alarm, leave the building immediately via a fire exit and make your way to the assembly point, which is Ipswich Town Football Ground. Follow the signs directing you to the fire exit at each end of the floor. Do not enter the atrium. If you are in the atrium at the time of the alarm, follow the signs to the nearest fire exit. Use the stairs, not the lifts. Do not re-enter the building until told it's safe to do so. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. That's Claire Philpott, our Governance Officer. Also present today is the Chief Planning Officer, Phil Isbell. Phil. Area Planning Manager, Mark Russell. And our Legal Advisor, Ian Dupre. Morning. And the case officers today are Samantha Summers and Jamie Martin Edwards. Thank you. Right, moving on. Okay, there we go. Apologies for absence and substitutions, please, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Suez, Councillor Margaret Maybury, and we had no substitutions. Thank you.
Declarations of interest? None received? None received. Thank you. Moving on. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of March. You've all had a copy, I hope. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of these meetings? Of these minutes, sorry. No? Fine. In that case, could I have a pros of Councillor Osborne? Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Jameson. I will now get the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic votes.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Councillor Beer. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. That's 7 votes for and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Minutes are approved. I will sign them later. To receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received.
None received. Site inspections. Sam, I believe you're going to make a site inspection request.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. This committee site inspection request comes directly from the Chief Planning Officer. The application is for the conversion, repair and extension of existing farm buildings to form 5 dwellings, erection of a garage, demolition of buildings, provision of new vehicular access and associated landscaping at Irwitton Hall Farmyard. Members may remember that Councillor Davis requested a site inspection previously and members voted against the site visit. Since that time, further information has been received and consultations have taken place. It is on that basis that the Chief Planning Officer urges members to reconsider their decision not to visit the site. The Chief Planning Officer would like members to visit the site in... The Chief Planning Officer would like members to visit the site in order to fully understand the location of the application site and its context within the historical setting of a Grade 1 listed gatehouse and Grade 2 star listed hall. This plan shows the relationship of the site to the listed buildings. The site is marked with the yellow square. The Grade 1 listed gatehouse is marked with the red star, and the Grade 2 star listed hall is marked with the orange star. The buildings to be converted are towards the front of the site, with the large barn to be demolished. Sorry, could I have my pointer? Sorry, technical hitch.
Quick question for the officer. I can see two large barns. Which one is going to be
Yeah, I'm
demolished?
just trying to get my pointer up and then I'll be able to show you. Okay. That would help. Okay, so we have this large barn here, that would be staying. This large barn here would be removed, and the buildings to the front of the site are the ones to be converted into dwellings. This shows in a bit more detail what's proposed. So that very large barn at the back of the site is to be retained, and the large barn that you saw in this area here to be demolished. These are the buildings to be converted and extended to form the 5 dwellings. This plan shows the proposed layout. During a site inspections, members will also have the opportunity to see the location of the proposed access point, which is across this paddock here, and what the effects might be on the area of outstanding natural beauty. The owners of Irwerton Hall, which is the Grade 2 star listed building just here, have agreed that members can go onto their property to view the site from their house and to see the context of the site with the Grade 1 listed gatehouse, but also the Grade 2 star listed building. Here are some photographs. And on the left-hand side, you'll see where the photograph is taken from, just to give you a bit of context. The whole of the site is contained within a red brick wall. There's some breaks in it, but not very many, so it's an intact farmyard area. This one is just taken from this location here, just looking at those front buildings and wall, and these are some of the buildings that would be converted. This is the Grade 1 listed gatehouse with the farmyard behind. Again, looking in the other direction, so you can see how close these farm buildings are to that Grade 1 listed gatehouse there. This is taken from the driveway of Irwerton Hall, looking back towards some of the buildings that are to be retained and extended. Again, looking from Irwerton Hall back into the site, and as you can see, that very strong brick wall that surrounds the site is mainly still intact. Just moving a bit further around the site, another one of the barns that would be converted. This is taken from the back of the site, so that's the brick wall that forms the boundary, and this large building is the one that is to be retained. So from that area you can't see any of the buildings at the front of the site. This is going from the other direction on the other side, from the paddock area. The brick wall has actually failed just here. I believe that the application also involves rebuilding of that brick wall to put back the wall and the boundary, apart from the section that would be the breakthrough for the access. This metal barn here is the one to be demolished. The one at the front is one of the ones that is to be converted. This is looking at the access point through to the site. So this is the building to be demolished. Just here you can see one of the buildings to be retained, and that very large Dutch barn that will also be retained is in this area here. Again, that's the large Dutch barn to be retained that you could see from the garden of Overton Hall. Some of the brick wall. And this is looking towards the back of the site, towards Overton Hall in the background here. This is looking from the access point across the paddock where the access drive would cut across here. And that's it. Thank you.
When the lights come on, I'll be able to see you. Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't quite hear, but did you say we'd already had a request for a site inspection from Councillor Davies, and that was turned down? I can't remember the reasoning. And what is different now between that request and the request now of the Chief Planning Officer who wants us to go on it? And why has it taken all this time? The difference, why didn't we know this at the last, when the original one was put forward?
I'll get the Chief Planning Officer to answer that for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. At the time of the previous request, we obviously hadn't received the advice in the detail that we have now, and the application has actually changed from that to now. The application has received quite a lot of comment. If you look on the website, there's over 50 comments have been received from locally interested parties, which itself is of no measure of anything other than interest. But we are in that sensitive AONB relationship. The heritage comments that we have are not completely consistent, and to that extent I think it's useful for members to understand the relationship between buildings and take a view for themselves when coming to their own decision. We as officers have got to make a recommendation that will kind of weigh up what recommendation to put to you, but there is quite a lot of interest in the heritage angle here, and from my point of view it's sensible for members to go on site to view those elements for themselves, including the access and the relationship of the various elements of the barn group to the adjacent listed buildings. Thank you, Chairman.
Quickly come back on that. Yes, I accept and understand all that. I just think it might have been more helpful at the time to Councillor Davies, who'd put this forward, that this perhaps information or discussion should have been had, because that would have saved us doing it twice. And I do think it's a valid point, Mr. Chairman. The councillor came forward with a request and we said no. And you know, they've now changed their mind. I'm sorry.
Councillor Davies to speak, and he will give you the true version, or the right version of what you were suggesting. Any more questions? Councillor Hinton for the officer.
Yeah, just a quick one for Samantha. The access point, new access point for the new development, for the houses and the barn conversions, seems to completely cut off, along with the development, seems to completely cut off the to be retained Dutch barn. How is access supposed to be gained to that building, or do they have to go through the gardens of the houses that are going to be built?
I'm not too sure of the relationship of the existing farmyard and how that will be accessed. Currently, it is accessed through between some of the farm buildings at the front. That wasn't actually a suitable access. Visibility is very, very poor in that location. So they have suggested cutting across that paddock. My understanding is, but Rose would be able to clarify this during her presentation to committee, is that all of the traffic will be going through that new access point, not between the existing buildings, as is the situation at the moment.
Mr. Chairman, if Samantha can put up the proposed development plan overview, you can see what I'm getting at. There, bonk. New road comes in, fair enough. If it's needed because of visibility, etc., then that's a logical way to do it. But as you can see, it creates a east-west or west-east, whatever it is, entranceway there with some buildings, but leaves the to-be-retained building almost sort of cut off from any point of access. whereas the existing layout, it's linked into the main farmyard, which one would expect.
Yes, I completely understand what you're saying, and I think this is one of the reasons that the Chief Planning Officer would like members to go out on site and understand the relationship of how everything's going to work. There will be more detailed plans available, I'm sure, at the time of the site visit so that you can clearly see. And I will ask that question to Rose, and perhaps she could clarify that if a site visit takes place.
Chief Planning Officer would like to make a comment.
Just to add to what Sam has told you, the area of the pole barn that you just see described there that you're referencing was previously the application for 2 dwellings on that site. That's now been omitted as part of this, and you now have a relationship which includes, I believe, potentially equestrian use, which has already been going on the site, in relation to the adjacent conversions and access, as far as I understand it, and I may have that, we'll check this and advise on the day, it is shared. The present access through the farmyard is, I think, from all intents and purposes, not a desirable access in terms of visibility onto the main road. And I think all of these elements, there is some controversy, as you'll see from the papers in due course, about the positioning of the access and its relationship. All of those elements do require careful consideration, Chairman. So I think the circumstance is that is a changed circumstance from the position when the application was put to you for a site visit previously, and albeit we have fewer dwellings, we have a more complicated proposal in some senses. Thank you, Chairman.
Any more questions for the officer? Okay. Councillor McLaren.
Do we get an opportunity to contribute to the debate after?
Yeah. I'm going to. What I'm going to do is, if all the councillors have finished asking questions, I'll get Councillor Davis as the ward member to make his comments. Hope it won't take too long, and then we can move into some sort of debate. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak on this. And also I want to say thank you to Sam for a very good presentation, which hopefully Planning Committee members will have gleaned more from that presentation than the previous one. And the reason why I've asked it to come back after discussing it with Phil Isbell, Chief Planning Officer, is because I felt that the last time you weren't really given enough information to make perhaps the correct decision. Not saying it was wrong last time, it was just probably not the way it should be. This is a very controversial and very complex application, and it's been rumbling on for quite some years. Previous applications have been turned down. I'm not here to extol the merits of the either a refusal or any sort of determination, but just to implore you to come out. You need to see for yourselves just what all this is about. The topography, the location of the proposal, close to a Grade 2 listed gatehouse, which is less than a football field away, to the Grade 2 star listed house, how that overlooks the gardens and how the development will dominate over that. There's also the importance of it being in the AONB. You need to literally walk the land to see how that plays out in terms of the street itself, the small lanes that go through Irwitton. I know some of you will already be aware of it, but in relation to this development, I think it's important that you see that. Councillor Hinton points out about the entrance. It's really important that you see that in reality, in situ, how it relates. So I won't go on. I just like to underline the importance of please come out and do a site visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any questions, Councillor Davis? You prepared to take it? No? Okay. Fine. Would anybody like to comment? Oh, Alison, would you like to start?
Just that I'd like to propose that we go for this site visit.
Thank you. Councillor Davis seconded that. Any more comments? Mary, you were keen to...
Yes, Chair. Well, when it came last time, I actually supported a site inspection visit. I think this committee has got to be consistent in its application of the rules. 2 weeks ago, we had a great debate about heritage at a site inspection we did. This Overton Hall is known to me. It's neighbouring to my patch, and I think members need to see need to know its history and how it relates to the nation. And I think it's important that they make a good decision if they visit it. So I'm supporting the inspection visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any more comments? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I absolutely agree with the proposer and seconder on this, and obviously with the overview that Councillor Davis has given. I think this is an opportunity to look at something which is quite a complicated setup, and I'd prefer to see the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Any more comments? If not, I'll ask the Governance Officer to organise a vote. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Councillor Beard. Thank you. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 7 votes for and 1 against, so that's carried.
That's carried. Thank you. And I think we're going to try and arrange this for next week.
4th of May, Chair.
4th of May. Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on to the planning application for us today, DC 20-03116, land to the east of Sudbury Road, Cockfield, Bury St Edmunds. Councillor Mabry's not with us. In that case, I will now invite the case officer. Sorry, Jamie, I'm rushing you. I'll now get the case officer, once he's all up and running, to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, members of the public. This application is on land east side of Sudbury Road, Cockfield, erection of a new workshop building with existing access to the site from the A1141, which will be upgraded. So a bit of application context to start with. This application was presented before committee on the 10th of March 2021. The application was granted as per officer's recommendation at the time. On the 8th of July 2021, the decision was quashed for a judicial review process. The challenge of the decision was the claim that there was a misinterpretation of the application of policies from the development plan, and in particular CS2, CS11 and EM20. So this application has been brought before committee members today as a fresh assessment. So I'll give some site context further. Red outline there just shows the area of Babergh. We're situated just north of Cross Green in Cockfield. And again, to give some more context in regards to the towns, urban areas and core villages that we would perhaps see this type of application directed to, this gives an indication of how far away they are. So 16 kilometres away from Stowmarket, 26 kilometres away from Ipswich, 18 kilometres away from Hadley, 7 kilometres away from Lavenham, 13 kilometres away from Sudbury, 10 kilometres away from Long Melford, and 8 kilometres away from Bury St Edmunds. Just zooming in a little bit further, I'm not sure on this you can see it quite clearly, but I'll start off by indicating where the site is, indicated in the hatched area. It's got an orange outline in this map. There's a green box here and a green box here. These indicated 2 buildings which First Grade Limited, which the applicants currently reside in. They rent these properties and work out of. There's a blue building here as well. It's marked as blue. It's not blue in real life, but this indicates a second building that is rented by a different business, and together they make up Ivy House, which is a small cluster of commercial buildings. I've also indicated here in the red box is Crossways, which is a residential building, and it's outlined curtilage in a red outline there. It's also key to note that we have a haulage business just to the south, and we also have a cluster of farm buildings here and some residential dwellings here, and there's a residential bungalow just in here as well. So this is just showing the red outline plan. It was shown on orange on the previous map, and we've also got the blue outline which shows land also in the applicant's ownership. So there's this land in between the residential building of Crossways and the existing buildings, commercial buildings, that is not to be developed as part of this application. You'll see later on the landscape plans that there is some buffering that's going to be proposed in these areas. Again, just some context. If I just bring up some notes, bear with me. Thank you. So we have the A134 travelling along here. And what I've indicated here is a constraints map. These shaded buildings are listed buildings, and this is a conservation area of Cross Green, Cockfield. The site is on this side here. So the site's indicated with a star here, and that is the settlement boundary of the hinterland village of Cockfield, Cross Green. I'll show on the next slide that actually Cockfield is made up of multiple hinterland or multiple settlements that make the hinterland village of Cockfield as a total. That distance between the two is approximately 420, 425 metres. It's separated by agricultural fields, and just in this area here we can see lakes and ponds associated with the farmstead down here. So these are the settlements that make up Cockfield. We've got Cross Green here, the site is indicated here. We also have Great Green on this side, and we have Crowbrook down this side, and Windsor Green here. So collectively they make up Cockfield area. So just moving into some of the plans, this is a topographical survey. The site is fairly flat. It's on slightly lower, ever so slightly lower land than the main road that runs along its western boundary. So the development itself is a purpose-built workshop or commercial building. It's got a lean-to extension on this side. The access is currently existing, but this will be improved as part of the proposal and widened. We can see a large area of tarmac, and we can see storage area on the side here as well. We also see from photographs that I'll show on screen shortly that we've got some overhead lines. These are proposed as part of a UK Power Networks application to be put underground. So the building itself, let's make sure I get the measurements correct on this. We're looking at external dimensions 54.9 metres in length, 25 metres wide, and a ridge height of 10 metres, and an eaves height of 8.82 metres. Additionally, the lean-to element, which is shown on this side here, with dimensions of 24.8 metres in length and 8 metres wide, with an eaves height of 7.6 metres. This makes up the proposed workshop and office building, which have a combined gross internal floor space of 1,676 metres squared. We've got the main area of the workshop in the centre. We've got cafeteria, canteen, office elements, office rooms and toilets, and then the lean-to element, which is here, is the paint shop. Cross-section of the building, important to see because what we've got is a purpose-built crane inside, which will help with the moving of large fabricated objects. Apologies, this doesn't show very clearly on this slide, on the screen, big screen, but this is the existing access and it shows the visibility displays. And again, visibility displays on this side. We're going to have 2 trees removed to be able to cater for the improved access. We've got 1 tree here that's going to be removed, and there's another one approximately here in the visibility display that will be removed. So this is just showing the drainage design. Can't quite see very clearly there, but under the tarmac we have a soakaway there that will be for the building itself. And then we have a secondary soakaway located just to the north, still within the red line plan, and that will act as the soakaway for all of the hard surfacing within the site itself. Foul water drainage comes out of the building, and again, it's not very clear on what you can see on screen, apologies, but if you just follow my cursor, it goes north, the foul water drainage, and in essence comes across here and into a ditch here that the applicants have permission to drain into. So again, we can see the overhead wires here that will be put underground. And then what we can also see here, and I do zoom in on the next slide to make it a little bit more clear, but we've got a decent amount of landscaping in this position here, and also within the buffer, which is the blue line area outside of the red line to the north, which increases the buffer with the residential dwelling. We've also got some planting along this side here. So then just to zoom in, again, tree planting on this corner and tree planting along this side. And then this is a 10-metre buffer in total that the applicants are now proposing, which wasn't before members on the first application, to increase the buffer with the residential building to the north. It's probably also important to note that the existing access or existing driveway, shall we say, goes all the way up to this edge here. There are gates currently which are indicated on here that go into the existing commercial area. So just some photographs. This is a mixture of photographs that you would have seen the first time round and some new up-to-date photographs. So this is the exact access as existing. This will be widened, signs removed. This is the particular tree that's going to be removed as part of the process. You'll also note up here that I've just put some arrows of where photographs have been taken from. So this is looking through the visibility displays. My understanding from cross-referencing the plans and being on site is this is the tree that's going to be removed out of for the visibility displays. There's no other trees to be removed. So just standing inside the site in this direction and looking in a kind of northwest area, we can see the existing conifer trees that are part of the buffer for the Crossways residential building, and we can just see the tops of the existing commercial buildings that first grade are currently in. The concrete pad or driveway which runs along that eastern boundary is existing, and we can see that obviously the parcel of land itself is mowed grassland. So just standing from the opposite end and looking down, this is a more recent photo that was taken, looking at the concrete pad. We can just see that tree there that's going to be coming out. And just looking in a westerly direction, we can see the overhead lines that are proposed to go underground. So just jumping up onto this area here, we can see the neighbouring tenants of the Ivy House site. And then just looking down the A143. And then just opposite the current access to, you can see the office block that is rented by first grade here and the car parking. And we can also see here these photos stitched together, the access into Crossways. And you can just about see the top of the house of Crossways in there. So similar position, but just looking in a more southerly direction. And we start to see the site here. Again, you can see roughly where that photograph's been taken from. And then just going down to the T-junction area, and we can see the site in its entirety, grass mowed area. We can see the buffer area across with the residential dwelling crossways. The existing access that they will now be using is further down this road here. And this is where we'll see the planting come onto the corner that I showed you on the landscape plan previously. Haulage company, which is just on the other side of the junction. And if I just flick back, actually, you can just about see the farm buildings as well on the opposite side of the road that are located here. A bit more scope of the existing haulage business that's there. And again, the farm buildings on the opposite side. So the recommendation in this instance is that we see that this site is disconnected from existing settlements. It's classified as countryside and therefore contrary to CS2 and CS11. And our recommendation is refusal on this instance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Any questions from the members? Councillor Beer.
Could I just ask you, I see the highways comments, but what you've just said about the road, you don't say much about the actual A134 road and the junction there, which is definitely in need of some considerable improvements because the road is narrow, there's no middle lane for turn and right if you're coming from the Sudbury Road. Was there any comments of that at all anywhere other than just what I've read in the highways response?
No, other than what we have in the highways response, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Busby.
Could you go back to slide 4, please?
There you go. Sorry about that.
That's all right, it's my fault. It's in the countryside, but I mean, it's fairly central to most of the towns in our area. One would argue that that's actually quite a good location for a business, wouldn't you think?
I think if we look at the development plan as a whole, CS2 says not in the countryside, subject to, and CS11 says has to be well related. So that's what we're making the judgment on, particularly in the evidence of a JR recently, where we perhaps looked at it in the way that you were saying there.
Isn't that well related? I mean, it's central to everywhere. I think it's just how you interpret some of the words in the planning policies.
I think that we need to be thinking about where employees are coming from, where future employees are coming from, where business is coming from. Is that a sustainable location? Those policies that we have in the development plan are looking to direct this type of development towards our urban areas, to our core villages, which this is not.
Any other questions? Councillor Jameson, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks. In your report on paragraph 3.42, you say that the applicant could have looked at options at Gateway 14, in Lady Lane or Sudbury. And I just wondered, do we know if there's definitely land or buildings on any of those sites that would have been perfect for this applicant?
I think it's key to understand that this is a purpose-built building, but what I would also add is that there's a substantial amount of land that's been approved recently for commercial areas. There's no reason why that land can't come forward and be changed slightly to make a purpose-built something on it if there's approvals already on there. But in our eyes, that land that we've approved at Gateway 14, Sudbury, Hadley, Lady Lane, for example, we've got allocated land that's still redundant. There's no reason why this building couldn't go on any of those sites.
So there is plots and areas in those business sites that would have been suitable in your opinion?
In my opinion, there's land available for this type of building, and we would be more than happy to look at a subsequent application should a tailor-made package for that particular piece of land that has allocations on.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions for the officer? Councillor Busby.
I'm just picking up on that point, but those places that we've referred to there aren't close to this site, and the business is already on this site. And it's presumably convenient for its employees to go there. Saying it's quite easy to say, oh, you can go to Gateway 14 or the sugar site, British Sugar, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But this is where the business is.
Of course. So the business isn't on this site. This is an undeveloped land. The business is on a historical farmstead that's been converted in the past, that's kind of gone through that organic process. In terms of going on to, apologies, I forgot the first part of the question, Councillor, apologies, the statement.
Well, it's saying that these other places are available.
That's right. Apologies, I'm with you now.
And the employees work where they...
I think we need to be careful with that. There's a risk that needs to be evaluated. Does that give an opportunity for every single rural business within our district to say exactly the same thing and just develop the greenfield site next door to them? That's a precedent that we might be standing by taking that kind of approach.
Chief Planning Officer wishes to comment.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, it's always a difficult one where you've got rural businesses that have grown and have outgrown their location essence. We've faced this and have faced this over many years, and that's where your policies look to direct employment in a particular way. And we as officers have gone through CS2, CS11 and looked to explore that in detail with the applicant. They have answered that. You know, the committee is here to make its judgment on the application, and the important point from the planning authority's perspective is consistency of decision making. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor McLaren.
I am really confused actually, because it's only 15 months that in this committee we've been advised to support the application. Why are we in the position we're in today, where we're looking at that decision that was made, or the recommendation that was made by officers? Thank you, Chair.
Chairman, so the previous committee hearing looked at the application without scrutinising CS2, CS11 issues. Those policies apply to this development as they do to residential, and we accepted that that was a defect in our reasoning, and that's why we bring the application back to you with further information, our assessment and the applicant's position on those policies. So yes, it was presented to you previously, and that was the subject of a third-party challenge in the courts. So that's why it's back here.
Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a question. I think it probably is more best directed to the Chief Planning Officer than the officer, no offence intended, because it concerns the policy issues that the JR have highlighted. So they've, the JR says that we're in conflict with CS2, CS11 and EM. I forget which EM, but you know the one, it's in the papers. But I also note in para 3.5 that that case makes it clear that most important policies should be viewed together and an overall judgment made whether the policies as a whole are out of date. So my question is, are the policies referred to CS2, CS11, EMs, etc., are they to be considered out of date since we're developing a new joint local plan? How much weight can we give to this court ruling as compared to the JR? I'm just seeking for guidance on where we focus.
Thank you, Chairman. So I will try and shed some light on that. The basket of policies idea is not new. Effectively, if you have any basket of policies on any application, it will point in lots of different directions, and you will not, almost certainly, you will never fully comply with every policy. So you have to take a view in the round, and up-to-datedness under the NPPF is compliance and consistency with the NPPF. So our view in advising you and having rehearsed CS11 and CS2 in front of various inspectors in the past, we're comfortable that that is, quote, up to date for the purposes of your decision making. So those policies are up to date. They're not the only policies, and don't forget The way that the courts will approach a problem is to say that the courts interpret policy, decision makers weigh the policy. And when you look at the NPPF, that says many things about economic prosperity and development, which arguably you might say, on the facts, you weigh differently to the development plan. The starting point for any decision a court will tell you is the development plan, and you should make your decision in accordance with it unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The NPPF is one of many considerations, and as I'm sure the applicant and his agent would tell you, there are policies in the NPPF which attach significant weight to economic growth. But we have to take a kind of a consistent view as decision makers, and if there is a departure here, we need to be able to identify why that departure should be made and give reasons. It does not stop a committee from making a departure. You are not hidebound to follow the policy, but the public expect you normally to follow it because that's your policy as a council. Does that in any way help, Chairman?
I'll ask Councillor McClure.
I think it's important to get this out so early on because it's going to be the central point we're going to be considering.
You're right. Councillor Jameson.
Yeah, just sort of following on from that, is the way we assess the policies we're talking about dependent on whether we think judge this as a relocation or an expansion? Do the policies determine differently?
So if I take that one, policy EM20 is from your local plan and a saved policy. It doesn't exist in a similar format in the NPPF. So you could question whether that is completely up to date for its consistency or alignment with the NPPF. CS2 and CS11 are called strategy policies. They do not talk about relocation and realignment. They talk about proximity to built-up area boundaries. And their test effectively is that sustainable development should be located on the periphery of the settlements that you have. That's how CS11 and CS15 look to start their process. They're not concerned with relocation, and you might say that that is perhaps a distracting argument. This is a new site. Whether it is an extension or a relocation, the facts are this is a new building on a new piece of ground that does not have a planning permission for this use, Chairman.
Thank you. Any more questions for the officer? You can always come back to the Chief Planning Officer in the debate. No? Thank you very much, Jamie. I will now invite the representative of the local parish council, Ian Levitt. If you would like to address the committee, you have 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to read out a statement on behalf of the council. Cockfield Parish Council remains firm in its position of strongly objecting to the application for this factory development. Since the outset of this lengthy consultation, Cockfield Parish Council has continued to raise its concerns as to the magnitude of the proposals and the subsequent impact the operation would have on the locality and neighbouring amenity. These matters have been communicated in a number of formal consultation responses. These have all remained consistent in objection during the period. Similar concerns have also been raised by immediately local and more distant residents. Equally, other consultees have expressed their reservations on aspects of the scheme. In attempts to mitigate the effects that the site would have on the residents and surroundings, the applicant has continued to provide some reasoning, supplemental information and only subtle variations to his position. However, the overall design and concept has not significantly changed, and the scheme still represents an unacceptable imposition on the community. The Parish Council reiterates that at this time it sees no significant and only peripheral attempts to address its key concerns, which are the overall building, mass, scale and design are too substantive for the location, light spill and light pollution to the surrounding area, the noise impact of working operations from both the actual workshop and those activities within the service yard area, the potential for 24/7 working hours bring associated disruption and nuisance, apparent unrestricted delivery hours together with associated HGV movements leading to further intrusion, concerns as to whether the applicant can continue his business activities in a similar manner given that he currently enjoys an unregulated environment at his nearby premises. The overall visual impact and limited extent of landscaping screening, equally the time for any new planting to be effective. The potential risk for the undeveloped portion of the overall site coming under further development if a precedent is set in allowing the initial factory to go ahead. The Parish Council sees the growth of this metal fabrication industrial enterprise completely inappropriate for the location. If there is any desire to develop the site, this is not the solution. A far more suitable and less intrusive light commercial employment opportunity or residential use may well countenance some support, not this factory in its present form. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the Speaker? Councillor Beer.
Could I ask whether the Parish Council has any consultation with the applicant? Because you make a very strong argument for the size of the building. I personally think it's ugly, but the massing of it. Have you spoken with them or given suggestions of what might have been acceptable, bearing in mind that it is already there, the business?
I cannot recall an instance where the applicant has attended the Parish Council. I am not aware of any non-Parish Council meeting discussions that have taken place.
Just come back on that.
Councillor Beer, go on.
Follow-on question. If the application was for something smaller, and bear in mind we have to deal with what's in front of us, I know that, would it have been more favourable, do you think? Or, you know, would you be prepared to accept anything? Or, because this is large, and this is massive, and it is ugly, in my opinion.
I would perhaps refer to the last sentence. I'll just read it out again. If there is any desire to develop the site, this is not the solution. A far more suitable and less intrusive light commercial employment opportunity or residential use may well countenance some support, certainly not this factory in its present form. Mr. Chair, if I can just add a point. It would be fair to say, I think, that obviously I have to come here and represent the Parish Council. I think it would be fair to say that there will be nuances of opinion amongst parish councillors as to what would or would not be acceptable. Some parish councillors will take as a very high weighting the impact on the resident in Crossroads, who is here. Some parish councillors would be more inclined to think about perhaps employment opportunities in a smaller item. We are unanimous that the present proposal is frankly simply too big.
Thank you. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for coming on today. You suggest in your submission and your own statement just now that you believe this to be a 24/7 operation. I just wonder if you could comment further on that, because I look at the report and it does state restrictions on opening times and a restricted number of times per year that any work would be possible, restricted to likely no more than 10 occasions per year. So that doesn't square with your suggestion of a 24/7 operation.
My understanding of the Parish Council discussions is that we accept what has been written in the original submission, which did talk about 24/7, I believe. There have been changes. It would be fair to say the Parish Council are sceptical about what may happen in practice. This is a very dangerous junction, if I may say so, which is well known, and we are talking about HGVs here. It's not an easy turning in. If any HGV misses that turning, it has to go down to the conservation area of Cross Green, and the residents there are obviously extremely concerned about any potential for, shall we say, leakage or movement to move away from what might be strictly permitted.
Councillor McCraw, follow up.
I just wanted if somebody could tell me if that we have environmental protection officers who do actually look out for these sorts of things. I imagine they would be on the case if there were to be any breaches of a planning condition. Is that correct?
Your question is what would happen were there breaches of planning?
Given the scepticism expressed.
It would go to our planning enforcement department and they would liaise with environmental health under their own legislation, yeah.
Any more questions? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Moving on. I understand we do have an objector. Would you like to identify yourself, sir, and tell us your relationship?
Hello, my name is Stephen Hopkins. I'm a solicitor and partner of Holmes and Hills LLP. I represent Mr. and Mrs. Hannaford, who are the occupiers of the adjoining site, the residential dwelling house that's been identified in the photographs.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes. Can you please get a bit closer to the microphone? I think one of the officers is having trouble hearing you.
I can do my best. Okay? Pursuant to section 38, subsection 6 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, the determination of a planning application must be made in accordance with the development plan. That's must be made in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The NPPF reflects this and makes it clear that the development plan is the starting point for decision making. This emphasises the importance of a plan-led system for good planning. That's what's been impressed upon you by your officers here. This is a statutory obligation upon this committee. I need to make that clear as well. The interpretation of policy is a matter of law. That's outlined in Tesco and Dundee. It's a well-known case. The previous judicial review dealt with the previous misapplication and misinterpretation of policy. You now have a High Court judgment which tells you how you are to interpret policies CS2, CS11 and EM20, and they've been identified as the key policies for the determination of this planning application. Your officer's report now interprets these policies correctly and applies them correctly and recommends refusal because this proposal is contrary to policy, quite clearly. Your officer's report identifies that the application site is located in an area defined by the Council's development plan as countryside and outside of the built-up area boundary. The report then goes on to identify that the current use of the application site is undeveloped greenfield, capable of being used only for the purposes of agriculture, horticulture and so on, unless planning permission is granted for a different use. Within the documentation submitted with the application, the applicant makes it clear that its intention is to vacate the site it currently rents and it wishes to construct a large bespoke premises elsewhere on this site. Let us be clear, this is a planning application for the development of a large new industrial unit in the open countryside, a new unit on a new virgin site in the open countryside. The proposal is not for an extension of an existing site. The policies have been identified clearly as CS2, CS11, EM20, they're the key ones. Policy CS2 deals with the settlement pattern policy. It directs most new developments sequentially to towns, urban areas, then to core villages, and then to hinterland villages. After listing those villages, the policy concludes countryside. In the countryside, outside the town and urban areas, core and hinterland villages defined above, development will only be permitted in exceptional circumstances, subject to a proven, justifiable need. That is your policy that you are to apply. No exceptional circumstances, no exceptional need or justifiable need has been identified, and therefore your professional officer has concluded that the proposal is contrary to policy CS2.
Yes, it's to you, sir, but through our legal person. You've told us quite a lot of things that we should and should only look at and what's been directed. Could I ask our legal person to explain to me, if not other members, exactly what he was referring to, that we've got to do this and we've got to do that?
No, I can do that, Chairman. I think it is Mr. Hopkins, isn't it?
Yes, it is Mr. Hopkins.
Yeah, I think, am I switched on? Can I be heard? Yes. I think, to be precise, you said judgment. I think it was a consent order, wasn't it? I think I wasn't the solicitor who dealt with the judicial review. I think it was a consent order from my. But anyway, that doesn't make any great difference. The council accepted itself, and the High Court.
Would you like me to come back on that point
please.
for you? Yes, it's a consent order, but with any consent order, The reasons for the consent order being entered into have to be clearly outlined on the order, and those reasons have to be approved by the High Court in sealing the order. So it is a High Court order. It's not a consent order.
Thank you.
Just carve it up.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed. So, yes, Mr. Hopkins has just set out the plainly and clearly, and no one can disagree, that the law on planning decision making, which is section 38, subsection 6, that the council must, a decision as to whether to grant or refuse planning permission must be made in accordance with the development plan, and you experienced members of this committee know what the development plan is, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The NPPF is not part of the development plan, it's a material consideration. There may be other factors referred to by the NPPF or commonly accepted as relevant to planning decision making, which are material considerations. The officers, the council accepts that there was a mistake in the chain of reasoning in its previous recommendation, and we have now, we believe, advised you, we are now advising you, we assure correctly, as to the application of the relevant policies. I don't know if I can go any further than that.
Andrew McCraw.
It's my understanding that we are being asked to reconsider this submission in the light of the JR, not that we're being instructed on how to interpret our policies. The JR decision I haven't seen, obviously.
Yeah, well, the judicial review took it back to stage one. Our decision was set aside, so we're now back to square one. We've now brought you a report which we believe we're giving you a correct advice, a recommendation that is soundly resourced, but obviously members are at liberty to consider the matter themselves, decide if they agree with the officer's recommendation.
Can I come back on the point regarding the policy? It's a key point for this committee.
I think, Chair, in fairness, sorry.
In fairness, I'll have a word with our legal officer and then we'll see whether he wants to ask you a question.
In fairness, I think if you would just, I don't want this to turn into a lengthy discussion, but in fairness, I would advise letting Mr. Hopkins make this point if he'd like to, please. With your permission, Chairman.
Okay. Would you please make your point?
The point is that this council and this committee have misapplied these policies on a number of occasions previously. And we now have quite a clear judgment on a number of occasions now as to the correct interpretation of policy CS2 and CS11. And it's not that you're being instructed to do anything, but what you have is a clear judgment or clear interpretation of the policy which you should follow. That's the point we're trying to make. And the officer's report now recognises the previous misapplication and interprets the policy correctly. I think that's the point to be made. Thank you. I'm obliged.
Thank you. Any more questions for the objector? No. Right. Moving on. We do have a supporter of the application. Sir, can you identify yourself and tell us what your connection is?
My name is Alan Valentine. My name is Alan Valentine. I'm the owner and founder of First Grade Recycling Systems.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes to address the council. Committee, sorry. Council.
At First Grade, we design and manufacture screening and sorting systems for recycling companies to help them increase their recycling rates, reduce waste going to landfill or incineration. This is an existing growing business in the environmental sector, helping to achieve important government targets for recycling. We're experiencing high demand for our products. We cannot meet this demand because of the limitations caused by our current premises. We no longer advertise and we're turning away new customers. We're unable even to meet the growing demand of our existing customers. We are desperate for larger, more efficient manufacturing space. The officer's report says that EM20 cannot be used to support this application because it says this is a relocation and not an expansion. This is completely false. We are increasing from 6,000 to 15,000 square feet of manufacturing area, and from 12 to 20, probably more jobs. How can you argue that this is not expansion? The report says this is relocation. Yes, we'll be moving from some old buildings to a new building, but we'll be at the same address and using one of our existing 2 entrances. In the eyes of my staff, my customers and my suppliers, this is not relocation. For the benefit of local jobs and the local economy, this is not a relocation. Our benefit to local businesses and the local community will remain and increase. I cannot understand how this can be considered as a relocation. I do not believe the planning officer has properly grasped our requirements for our manufacturing premises. The recycling plants which we manufacture are physically very large. One plant can take us 4 to 5 months to build and contain many components. Some of these components are up to 4 metres wide and 17 metres long. That's 12 feet by 55 feet. We need a large space to manufacture these large items, space to move them into a paint shop, space to assemble them after painting, and then space outside to store them while we carry on with the manufacture of the rest of the plant. Then we need space to load them onto a lorry using a crane before delivery of the complete plant. We need a large manufacturing space with a large outdoor space, and we cannot afford to compete on price against the international companies bidding for warehouses along the A14 corridor, as the officer has suggested. This is why we've not been able to find suitable premises despite looking for over 12 years. This is the exceptional circumstance of our planning permission as required by CS2. The objections raised by the public and the council have been carefully addressed by the officer's report and found not to give reason for refusal. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Newman, the objector? Oh, the supporter, sorry. Oh, Councillor Owen.
Hi. I mean, I know you said you can't afford to go to different places, but crying out in Delphi, the old Delphi site, have you ever looked at that?
Sorry, what?
The old Delphi site in Sudbury. Have you ever looked at that? Because what you're putting in the ground, paint, they put oil in the ground, you know, and it's to ruin another site where you could put it somewhere where the underground's already ruined, if you know what I mean. So did you ever look at Delphi site? Was that ever looked at?
No.
It's such a shame because crying out for, and you've got the space up there. I don't know whether the new people would like to sell, but it's just standing there at the moment.
I'm not familiar with the site, I'm afraid. I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McGraw.
Thanks. Thanks for coming along this morning. I'd just like to ask, the current fabrication operation takes place to the north of the house on the other side, as it were. Is that correct?
Yes.
So
north and east.
And east, sorry, yes, okay. But it's the existing operation. What happens to that should permission be granted? And would you be making any mitigating measures with respect to that? I'm looking at the overall effect, and if we accept the point that the two entrances make this essentially the same site, which is obviously for discussion, but what happens to the old fabrication once the work is completed?
We currently rent that premises, so it'll go back to the landlord, which is Graham Parish Engineering, and they will either use that themselves or it's up to them.
But you wouldn't be continuing operations then?
That's the plan is not to.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll get the microphone in the right place. Mr. Ballantyne, can I ask why you've not had any, according to the Parish Council, you've not had any discussions with the Parish Council during this application? Thank you.
I was originally advised not to go to the Parish Council. I did try to go to the council meeting in earlier this year. I went to one of them, which it wasn't discussed at. I think there was an extraordinary meeting where it was discussed, which I missed.
Sorry, I can't recall that at all. No.
Okay. Sorry. In hindsight, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
It's always with applications. It is always good to discuss with your local parish council, especially in local residents. Can you tell me really the reason why you didn't do that?
With hindsight, yes, I definitely would. I'm very new to the planning process. This is my first ever planning application, and the people doing the proposal for us, they didn't advise me to go. So,
can I also just follow on with that, Chairman? Did you have pre-planning application discussions with our planning department before you put the application in?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Beer.
Yes, I think it's really on point of order. I thought the speaker was a supporter.
Yes.
You're now saying he's the applicant.
Yes, he is the applicant.
Oh, I wish that had been made clear.
He did identify himself at the beginning of his 3 minutes.
So will the applicant be speaking in his own right?
He's just spoken.
So this supporter is also the applicant?
This is the applicant who is obviously a supporter.
You see, with great respect, Mr. Chairman, my fellow councillor put a question about whether he'd done something with the parish council as the applicant. But I thought he was talking as the supporter of this. I've got questions for the applicant, but not necessarily for the supporters. I just want a rule as to...
This gentleman identified himself quite clearly before he started speaking as the applicant, as the owner of the business making the application. If you have questions for him, please ask now.
Well, I didn't hear all that, but I have got questions. Thank you. Well, if I can just follow on from that, the building, it really does look ugly to me. Have you considered any way to make it more attractive? Because obviously the parish council left you in no doubt that they don't like the massing and the design of it. Have you considered perhaps adapting that to be more friendly? And secondly, the highways, I know they've reported here and they don't have a problem, but that particular junction on the main A131 road is really quite dangerous. You have ground and facility there. Have you at all offered with the county council to try and improve that? I know they're saying there isn't any concern, but we all know, and I use that road, lots of locals there use it. You've said the large vehicles and the size of some of the equipment, they're going to need very large articulated lorries. Getting in and out onto that main road is a serious problem. And really, all you're doing is adding to that. You're not offering to help make that junction any better improvement. And to get a lane in the middle of the road for that people turn them right would be quite helpful. So I really want to know what you've done to try and solve the problem of the mess and the ugliness of it, and whether you've done anything or you're just accepting that Highway says it's okay. Thank you.
With regard to the building, I think it's in keeping with the buildings to the south, Hewick's Haulage, similar shaped building. There's some large agricultural buildings opposite. There's going to be quite a bit of planting around it to shield it. I didn't think it was ugly myself, but that's a matter of opinion. And with regard to the roads, we already use that entrance for the larger vehicles coming in and out. There's going to be, the entrance is going to be upgraded with the required visible displays. The highways had no objection and didn't suggest that anything else to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Councillor Busby.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, it refers in the report to just one HGV movement on average per week. Is that correct?
On average, yes. We did do a survey a long time ago, well, a few, at the beginning of this, and noted down every vehicle that came in and out, and that's what it was on average, yes. Because if it takes us 4 months to build a plant, after 4 months we might have 2 or 3 lorries going out. we're not an intensive business. We're just the things we make are quite big, so we need a lot of space. We're space hungry, but not intensive.
So you're saying by expanding, almost doubling in size, then you're only looking at an extra one HGV vehicle movement per week?
Yeah.
Okay. And the hours, since you say things take you 3-4 months to produce, why is it that you need to work 24/7 on occasion and Sundays and public holidays and things like that?
We don't. We have 24/7 planning permission on the buildings we're in now, and when we did this new planning permission, we naively didn't see any reason to change that, so we just put in exactly the same as what we got at the moment. Our working hours now are 8 till 5, Monday to Friday. They're our normal working hours. It was, in hindsight, it was a mistake to do that, but it was only because that's what the planning permission is on the buildings we're in. So we have changed that now, and we have restricted working hours. When the discussion came about restricting up working hours, we raised the question, sometimes you have a customer with a breakdown who needs a part made, wants a breakdown on a Monday afternoon and needs to be up and running as soon as he can. So someone would work late and get that done. Since 1 year ago, there's not been one occasion when we've actually worked late for a breakdown. So although there's these conditions in there that were detailed a year ago, in the last year there's not been one occasion when we've had to do that. And if you wanted that taken out, I'd be quite happy to do it, because it's not, we can find somewhere else to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ballantyne, you said that you'd had a pre-planning discussion with the planning officer, and in August, and we actually approved that planning application 15 months ago.
Yeah.
Had you already, having got the permission, had you already started the work on the site?
No. No.
Right, okay. And I was going to ask, what was your next step after this sort of discussion today?
If it's granted, we'll be getting on as soon as we can. There's a period you've got to wait for anyone to appeal, and after that we'd be planning to get workers to get busy on it as soon as we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
No more. Councillor Busby.
Sorry, there was one other thing. Would you consider spinning the building through 90 degrees so that it was running lengthways alongside the entranceway? So it was end on to the two residential properties at either end of it?
We've considered all sorts of orientations. Yes, I mean, we put it where it is because it's further away from the resident who objects, and so we got that buffer zone between us. And we thought it was more hidden where it is behind the existing bigger trees. I think if you put it 90 degrees round, it'll be more visible from the A134.
Is that an issue?
I think you've been answered, Councillor Busby. Have you another question? No? Any more questions at all? Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Thank you. We have a ward member present, Councillor Treiber. Matters come up, I'm afraid I'm going to have to pause the meeting. Thank you. Questions for the applicant? Well, I think we'd almost come to an end of that, hadn't we? Or while you've had a break, have you thought of some more? No? Thank you again, Mr. London. Fine. Moving on, we do have a ward member present. Councillor Arthey, you can address the committee if you have 5 minutes to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm kind of feeling for you all a little bit this morning. It's always interesting to hear lawyers come and speak to you. I sat on this committee for about 25 years, I think, chaired it for 10, and I always used to sort of wonder whether perhaps we were just an occupational hazard to lawyers. But the decision, of course, is yours. It may well be that lawyers argue about it afterwards. And I'm not going to go into the issues regarding the JR application on the previous decision of yours, but all I will say is that it seems the report and the presentation didn't make clear that an approval would be contrary to our adopted policies and would have to be properly justified. But I'm speaking this morning as the local ward member, and also ought to add that I've known the site for well over 40 years. There's a bit in the report about the history, and I remember it as wasp land drainage and their equipment being on site, and I also remember subsequent to that when Matro displayed their equipment on the field. In 2013, the Parish Council conducted a village survey which was designed to explore potential sites both for housing and for employment. And given its previous uses and its location, this site was considered as a possible site for employment use. When the application came to you previously, the Parish Council felt supportive of an employment use and the employment opportunities that it would generate, but they had very real concerns, if you remember, regarding residential amenity impacts, and you've heard some of those from the objector this morning. These are covered in section 6 of your report, and they relate mainly to noise, lighting, odour and hours of operation. They also had reservations regarding the design and mass of the building and landscaping, which has been mentioned by the Parish Council. Over the last 12 months, and given the judicial review application, the balance of local opinion seems to have shifted. And the view now is still a possible yes to employment use, but not this proposal. And that's because the impacts of this proposal cannot be fully and satisfactorily addressed. Now, this is a judgment for you. You've got in section 6 what those impacts are and how they could be mitigated. But whilst that judgment is yours, I would ask you to give special consideration for the view expressed by the objector, who has currently got the existing operator as a neighbour. We've heard from the applicant that those buildings will effectively be on the market for another occupier. There's parish engineering on the roadside, and if this was allowed, there would be this on the other side. So I have real sympathies for the objector because they would effectively be surrounded by employment activity, perhaps industrial activity, on 3 sides with a road on the 4th side. However, the only way that you can control land beside you is to own it, and this land has been there and has been used variously over the years, and one could argue, I suppose, that the objector could even have bought it themselves had they wished. Maybe they weren't offered the land. So I do have very real sympathies for the objector. And I have some sympathy as well for the shifting position of the Parish Council, because it was a very, very difficult application for them to look at. You can see from your papers that there are quite a number of other objectors in the village who expressed concerns. and not very many individuals supporting the application. So it was a very difficult decision for the parish council, and their view has shifted slightly since the previous application was, or the same application was previously considered by you. So I'd just like you to take all of those things into account. Thank you.
Councillor Arthur. Councillor Beer.
Well, I'd just like to ask, are you in support of it or are you against it? I mean, because what you've said, you're sort of come down on both sides. I'd just like to understand it a bit clearer.
Okay, well, I'm speaking this morning as the ward member, so I have to support the views of the parish council. They have shifted. When I spoke to you last time, I think the parish council were broadly supportive, but they were very concerned about the impacts. When you considered this last time, I think the view that was taken was that the potential harm could be mitigated against with a raft of conditions. I think at the last committee there was even mention of the fact that if there were so many conditions necessary, is it actually unacceptable? On balance, I think at the last committee you decided that those impacts could be mitigated against and voted for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Arthur. Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Arthur, yes, you mentioned somebody displayed equipment on that field. So for how long has that field, in your opinion, been used for, inverted commas, employment/industrial purposes as against agricultural?
Okay, I think it has been used for agricultural purposes, for grazing. I remember it from probably 50 years ago when it was used by, I think they were H. Wasp and Son, were a land drainage company. They owned all of the land, I think, from the road down to Cross Green, including the pits, which were dug for sand and gravel. And they used to display equipment. They used to use the land and display equipment. The most equipment displayed on that land was when Matro displayed a range, and I noticed Councillor Beer nodding. They displayed a range of equipment, probably on about half of the field. I cannot recall ever seeing any buildings on the land, though. I think it was always bare land and used for display purposes.
Thank you. Any more questions, Councillor Arthur? No. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Arthur. Before we go into debate, I'm told that the case officer has a slight correction to make to one of the maps. Is that correct? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Jamie.
Yes, we just noticed when the Word document has been PDF'd in your report that there's been a slight shift on some overlay of shapes. So on the left-hand side is what you will actually see in your report. Apologies, my battery just died. I've just plugged it on. I can't remember exactly what paragraph it's in, but it's in the site description sections. On the right-hand side is what it should look like. And what this is actually denoting here is the red line is what it is, the red line plan for this application, very roughly, indicatively. And then what we're showing here in green, and this is a historic photo from 1999, I understand, of some storage related to the existing business at Ivy House that was on that site. There has been no formal application. There's been no lawful development certificate as outlined within the report. There has also been evidence of gaps within that use since that photo was taken, as outlined within the report. But we just thought it would be appropriate just to outline that those shapes have shifted. So we're not trying to indicate this plot of land, we're trying to indicate this plot of land. It's literally just shifted when it's been PDF to the right for some reason. Just thought it would be important to highlight that to you.
Thank you, Jamie. Any questions for him? Councillor McCraw.
Would that previous occupation indicate then that it could be viewed as not being open countryside, having been previously developed in planning terms? I ask because I think it's relevant.
No, agreed. It definitely is relevant. But as set out in the report, we look at those as evidence as from the applicant as perhaps an ongoing use of the site, but we've concluded that that site still is considered as agricultural. Thank you.
Councillor Beer.
Mr. Chairman, before you go into debate, as a member of the Planning Committee, can I ask that as members will be informed as to why there was a pause, either now or after the meeting by email or what have you? It just felt that, quite rightly, it is your Planning Committee, you are the chairman, you quite rightly paused the meeting, but I would like to know as a member as to why it was paused and the outcome of that and the reasoning. Whether you wanted to do that publicly or whether you want to do that afterwards, that's up to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beer. We will do it at the end. Let's keep the thread going of the planning application at this particular time, and then we'll talk about it before we end the meeting, so it becomes public knowledge. Thank you. Okay, we're now open for debate. Anybody like to kick us off? Councillor McCraw.
Well, as a first for me, I haven't done a case that's been for any form of JR or a JR order, because I don't think this is so much a judgment as a technical matter, stating that we can't demonstrate that we, in that decision making, that we actually examine CS2, CS11 and EM20. Now, whether it's reasonable to suppose that because it wasn't mentioned, we didn't do it, as it rather sort of assumes that members of a planning committee have no knowledge of planning policies without having them spoon-fed to the members. But let's put that aside for the moment. So the whole thing is going to revolve around our examining those policies, CS2, CS11 and EM20 in the round, and in relation to the NPPF. So I'm looking very, very strongly at Section 3, the principle of development, because I think that's the only way we can possibly make a determination on planning policy issues. I think we've looked at the site in the previous application, mitigating circumstances, the screening, the delivery times and all the rest of it. But I think first we have to look at the policies. And I look at CS2 from para 310, and I have to ask the question of, are there exceptional circumstances subject to a proven justified need? And at the moment, we're clearly it's clearly obvious to us that the exceptional circumstances don't seem to really exist. There are some. I mean, exceptional circumstances could be the industrial use, but that's described, and the employment is described in CS11. The NPPF suggests in para 3.13 that it doesn't have the same exceptional circumstances test, and as such, CS2 has less weight. So then we're ruling under the NPPF. But could I be confident in granting a permission with all these questions about proving exceptional circumstances? Could I prove, for example, under CS11, that the additional hinterland village criteria in 3.27b, the only one of those additional hinterland village criteria on page 36 that I can see clearly that is fostered is number 4, supporting local services by expanding employment opportunities. And I'm not aware that it compromises any village local plan. But I don't think I can say I would be happy voting for this permission as it stands on the basis of those planning policies and on the basis that I don't think there's a clear enough case of exceptionality in this situation. I just thought I'd throw that in as that's the focus I'm thinking of.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw, for that starting point. Who else would... Councillor Busby.
Yes, again, it's a tricky one, isn't it? What seems to me is that, unfortunately, our policies seem to try and give us reasons for refusing things, whereas the NPPF seems to be more positive. It seems to be trying to encourage us to deliver developments, particularly industrial and employment ones. I mean, taking the whole section 6, building a strong competitive economy. Planning policies and decisions should help create the conditions in which businesses can invest, expand and adapt. Significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, taking into account both local business needs and wider opportunities for development. You know, this seems to be, the NPPF seems to be pushing us to try and help these businesses and help the economy grow, where our policies seem to generate this, well, you mustn't do that, or we can't do that, we don't want to change that, or that's in the countryside, we can't do this. And that's why we have this problem coming up with a reasonable answer that we can justify in an argument. I mean, perhaps the senior planning officer could explain the contradiction between paragraph 81 in the NPPF and CS2.
Thank you, Chair. Explain the contradiction. So, as I think I said earlier, you will always find that there is a tension between policies, and local plan policies are formed over a number of years. You see what happens with your current joint local plan, how long that takes to prepare. So it's not surprising that local plan policies do not always necessarily move in sync with national planning policies. The policy in the NPPF that you have there has been, in similar words, been running for a number of years. As I said right at the outset, it is perfectly foreseeable that you will have a development plan policy that says that you will control development in a particular area. The question of whether you have reasonable grounds to say, actually, we will depart from that policy, and I think that's what you're looking at here, is for you. Weight, the interpretation of policies is for the courts. I'm sure Mr. Dupre will correct me when I get this wrong. The weight to be attached to policies is for you, as long as you do that reasonably, and the government exhorts you to attach significant weight to what you do. But be in no doubt, you've obviously got considerable interest in this application and considerable concern locally. So you do need to have given that careful and thorough thought. You should start with your development plan policies, but they are not a fetter on your behaviour. You are entitled to depart from them if you have good reason to do that. The question of an exception is not written into the NPPF. The NPPF says significant weight. We as planning officers recommend to you what the policy, the development plan is as your starting point. We say that what you have in considerations takes you to a conclusion which is a refusal. As I think Councillor Arthur Ward's member said, it's your decision as a committee as long as you're reasonable with it. And the tension, if the facts here and the circumstances and considerations of this situation lead you to that conclusion, and you can be reasonable in demonstrating that, that's for committee.
Councillor Busby, you want to follow up?
Yeah, thanks. Well, taking on that on board, were it not for the fact that there are residential properties within close proximity to the proposed site, I would be recommending that we go for approval. But there are residential properties close to the site. And I have a similar example in Chattersham, where a house is located alongside what's become an industrial site, where there are people repairing motor cars, there's paint, fumes in the air, there's noise, there's lights, and it's made the residents' life an absolute misery. And it's caused all kinds of problems. So as much as I would like to suggest that we should approve in this case, because I do think that we should be encouraging business, and I think it would be an ideal place were it not for the neighbours' close proximity, and for that reason I can't really support it.
Any more? Councillor Hinn.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because our local plan is the, inverted commas, blueprint for the district. but the district varies enormously. Virtually every time you turn a corner, it's a bit different. We have something like 60% of our district that is completely rural. It's either little villages or agricultural land, if not more than that in terms of percentages. We have something like 80% of our working population who do not work in the district. They commute out of it every day. And here we are looking at a potential, all right, relatively small increase, but it sets the benchmark for employment within the district. If we're not going to support and encourage employment within the district, why on earth do we have economic policies? Why on earth do we keep building houses in the middle of the countryside? Because it says in the hinterland, CS11's the hinterland extra criteria, supports local services and or creates or expands employment opportunities. It goes on to talk about does not compromise or the delivery of permitted or identified schemes. I don't think this is conflicting with anything, compromise any other identified schemes. Yes, it's quite a long way from the, inverted commas again, functional hearts of Cockfield, but there's, what, 3 or 4 of those? It doesn't actually have one big central hub, it's split up. It is relatively close to 3 large industrial premises. The haulage company, the big farmyard on the opposite side of the road, and the garage facility next door to where its existing premises are. So it's, yes, I agree with Councillor Busby that there's a problem, if you like, with the fact that there are residential homes close to it. But that doesn't mean to say that we should say no to any form of employment opportunity on this site. What it does say, in my opinion, is that we should say yes, but we want to see extensive measures put in place to control the escape of fumes, etc. They have a separate paint shop, which in theory can have a closed air system around it to keep fumes inside. It needs a big open space for making these large bits of equipment. That's more difficult to control in terms of fumes, but they're not likely to be the sort of fumes that are going to cause problems. So looking at CS15 and CS11, I think that the weight is more on the approval side than it is on the refusal side, because it's helping the district.
Thank you, Councillor Hinton. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, very difficult situation. I tend to agree with both of our Councillor Busby and Councillor Hinton. And I'm always mindful of the fact of my days of employment and the amount of employment we had in areas that are, if you like, small but compact, and therefore the travelling that's now going on to other areas is quite large, and I would like to have seen employment back in these local areas. I'm afraid my view is that EM20, which is developed for employment and manufacturing and etc., does not outweigh the CS2, CS11, and also the residential housing around it. So it's a very difficult one for me. However, I must say that it would be very difficult for me to support something that I want and I'd like to see and manufacturing in that area, but CS2, CS11 will actually not EM20 will not outweigh that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor McLaren.
For Councillor Busby's benefit, I'm going to speak nearer the microphone. He says he can't hear me. Twice today, in the previous item and this one, I just feel a bit concerned that members have been advised to vote one way. And here again, officers have changed actually their recommendations to the committee, and I find that a bit difficult to understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to make a comment? Any other statement? Councillor McCraw.
There's a lot in here. I think we've all read it through very carefully. We obviously, if many of us remember the original hearing and the application, we haven't focused as much in this meeting on the site itself, the mitigation, but we dealt with that, I think, quite extensively at the previous meeting. I'm prepared to propose that we accept the officer recommendation of refusal, and I ask for a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Owen, do you wish to say anything?
Yeah.
You'll second that motion?
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a proposal and a seconder. Are there any more comments from anyone? Any more discussion, questions, before we go to the vote? No? In that case, I'll ask the area planning manager to tell me exactly what we're all voting for.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully members, you saw the table of papers with the expanded reasons for refusal, the policy issues therein. Are you happy that you've read that and understanding what the recommendation is? Please speak now if not. So be reminded that when you're voting now, if you're voting in the positive, you are going with the officer recommendation. Hopefully, Claire, I've said that correctly. And the recommendation, of course, is for refusal. So if you're voting in the positive, you're voting for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that vote is now in progress. Councillor Beer, can I take the vote? For refusal. Thank you. Refusal is a for vote is for refusal, yes.
Hope you got it right as proposed.
Thank you, members. Chair, that's 5 votes for refusal, 2 against and 1 abstention. That application is refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is it. I'll draw the meeting to an official close and thank you all for your attendance. If those who want to know what the hiatus was, I will attempt to tell you with the legal officer's advice.